I was always on go mode and going and going in survival mode that it wasn't really until my body almost forced me to that I started paying attention to it. And then I really kind of reached some sort of like stability with work and life, sort of, because with DACA, right, like you never really have normal or stable.
Yeah.
As your 2-year subscription, I think on DocuChange said that your 2-year subscription, right? As I was like reflecting, I was like thinking about how kind of what you said, right, is you hear all of this rhetoric, right, and the political landscape since I've been involved in that space. And I think it's also like, you know how teachers say, or like in education, I don't know if you've heard where they say like, oh, if you call a child a bad kid, like they'll internalize that and they'll act accordingly and they'll start to exhibit behaviors, right, that you're telling them that that's who they are. And I feel like low-key, like that's how I was, but trying to fight against it so much, and feeling like I needed to like be the perfect student, be the perfect blah blah blah, and so much so that like it kind of got to a point where like since it wasn't enough and nothing was changing, I kind of internalized it and felt like I wasn't enough, and like didn't really realize that was happening, and how much all of that was affecting me, and like how I saw myself and how I navigated the world and trying to like tread lightly and not make waves and da-da-da, but like, you know, and realizing that shouldn't be, you know, a way to live, or that you existing is enough to be respected as a human, and that I don't have to like be extraordinary to be worth, you know, having stability in my life and normality, right? Like, and yeah, a lot of unlearning, a lot of digging, I think, and reflecting and all of that. But yeah, it is, and it has been, and it continues to be a journey.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it was hard because at the time, right, like you said, right, like feelings came out and people felt emboldened, and so it wasn't just like people that were like, oh, nobodies. It was people that we had met through and built relationships with throughout the years that we were in school and were living in Galesburg, bringing out their Trump flags or putting out their banners and businesses. And it was tough, I think, for students, and because you can't just say like, right, like they had built friendships and relationships with the community, and so it was like very confusing, I think, because a part of you is like disheartened that they're like, you know, advocating for this person who's threatening, right, like your safety and your livelihood, and it felt like very personal, and so it was a difficult thing, I think, to navigate. And I think like a lot of like the culture houses were like experience things where like like trucks would drive by and like say racial slurs, like one of the fraternities like brought out their Confederate flag, and so like it was a wild time. I was like angry and frustrated, which is not common, I think, for like what I've heard from folks, because it was just like whispers, right? Of something was going to be announced, something was going to happen. And I think in kind of like being somebody that is always like, I need to like give back for my parents' sacrifices, wanted, you know, my parents to be included in that, and they weren't. And it was just kind of like that, like dreamer narrative over and over again. And right, the dreamer narrative being that, you know, only like if you're a stellar person or like you have like perfect grades, you need to deserve it almost, right? And it was so frustrating, I think, and almost felt like a sort of guilt, I think, in taking it, because I was like, what makes me different, right? Like, why, like if I was like, and all of these like, you know, like deadlines or whatever and dates that you had to be like, it's all very arbitrary, and like a lot of people didn't qualify, even like own advocates that helped the pass and make it happen, because it was a lot of advocates that did the work to get DACA being a thing. And I think that part of it was like, like, and whatever. They're like, oh, we needed to negotiate. We needed to give, da, da, da. I was like, I don't want to hear it.
Welcome to Through Immigrant Eyes, a podcast created by the Center for Immigrant Progress in hopes of amplifying and uplifting immigrant voices. As a grassroots organization, we believe that to empower our community, we must first listen to what they have to say. I'm your host, Karina Alvarez, and today we are joined by Karina Martinez to talk about mental health in the immigrant community. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me. I'm always excited and, more than anything, trying to speak to this topic. I think it's really important, and it could be taboo in our community. So happy to be here and excited that you guys are doing this. I was kind of binging your past podcast to get an idea, and it's really cool. So Thanks for doing it.
Awesome. So let's just start off with you, like, just introducing yourself. Like, what do you do? What's like your background, a little bit about your story?
Yeah. So I was born in Cuautla, Morelos, Mexico. Came to the United States when I was really young, 3 years old. Grew up in Waukegan, so I've been in Lake County my whole life, I think, with the exception of like going to school. And currently working for the government, for the state, doing legislative work. So kind of story that took me there, I think, is I think as early probably as high school, sort of volunteering in different organizations, nonprofits, really whatever I could get into and trying to learn more, I think, of how can I implement change and have an impact. I think because of how much my status or lack of status has impacted, I think, different aspects of my life, wanting to have some sort of say in whatever, in however I could, right? And so didn't really know that I could make a career out of it, though, I don't think, at the time. And so I went into school thinking I was going to do computer science, and then I realized, hey, I don't really like this. And they were like, oh, my counselor was like, oh, why don't you, like, you're already taking all these political science classes. I was like, do you want that to be your major? And I was like, you know what, maybe. And so ended up kind of pursuing that track and continued to learn more and try to gain more experience in the field. And ultimately, though, after graduation, I was like, don't really want to go to DC, don't really want to engage in government or politics right now. Feeling burnt out. I think before we were talking about how that can be a lot on us, and I think there's just like a lot to navigate. And so decided to take some time off, came back to Waukegan, worked for the Waukegan Public Library for 4 years, doing community engagement work, and continued to engage in different capacities in the community. And I think 2020 hit, and I think, like all of us, be feeling frustrated, not having kind of control over things that were happening. And so always knew kind of that I wanted to go back to school. Didn't really know what I wanted to pursue, and so made the decision to pursue public policy, and thinking that a lot of our, I think, organizations here are kind of limited to what their grants say or what their board says. And so realizing that only policy change could really have that impact, at least in the space that I was interested in. And yeah, graduated last year, and now I'm working for the state, working on policy. So that's pretty cool. And here we are.
Yeah, awesome. Well, congrats on all your... Sorry, I'm just moving this. Congrats on all your accomplishments. I think it's so amazing. So
Thank you. Yeah. It's been a whirlwind.
I bet. Yeah. So now kind of diving into, like, mental health.
Yeah.
So when did you start paying attention to, like, your mental health and, like, figuring out what does that mean? What is mental health?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, not until after college. Wow. I think I was always on go mode and going in survival mode, that it wasn't really until my body almost forced me to, that I started paying attention to. And then I really kind of reached some sort of like stability with work and life, sort of, because with DACA, right, like you never really have normal or stable.
Yeah.
As your 2-year subscription, I think on DocuChange said that, your 2-year subscription, right? And having that instability constantly. And but as much as I could, in trying to kind of find healing and unlearning and really digging into traumas, I think that I hadn't paid attention to, and I was like, like there's things there. And it wasn't until, again, your body forces you to look at those things.
Yeah. So when did you realize that your immigration status was having an impact on your mental health, like being a DACA recipient?
Yeah. Therapy. I think I always knew that it was almost like an obstacle, or constant obstacles that were being thrown at me. I was like you're playing Mario Kart and life is just all of the bananas and things that they're hitting you with, except life isn't a game. And that's not normal. And so I think just thinking of it as in that way. And I was like, oh yeah, these are just things that are happening and we just need to overcome. And not really realizing what it was doing to my mental health or my psyche. And I think realizing shit, that's why this makes me anxious, or this is why this makes me feel some type of way because of this other situation related to my status. And I think it was in one of the court cases that happened, one of the many court cases when DACA was being discussed, and I was talking to my therapist about it, and I was I'm just really frustrated and overwhelmed, and I I know that I should pay attention to it, but it's just a lot. And thinking no matter what we do, no matter being bamboozled into being this quote unquote perfect immigrant, and you're never being enough. And I think just being very, very frustrated, no matter what I do, no matter you did the good grades, you got the job, you did the thing, and still this country doesn't see you or accept you. And I feeling very overwhelmed, and I think emotional about it. I was like, oh shit, this is really impacting me in a way that I didn't realize. And I think even as young as I don't know, probably first grade, second grade. And I think kids are talking about Santa Claus and things like that. I'm having conversations with my parents about our status and why we can't go to Mexico with our cousins because of, this situation. And it's kind of wild, right? Because we're forced to grow up at a really young age and learn about these really complicated and nuanced things. And again, not really realizing what it's doing to us and how it's impacting us.
Yeah. And what was it like making that decision of okay, I need to go to therapy, I need to find a therapist? And how was that experience for you?
Yeah. Panic attacks. Yeah, and I laugh. I was we have really dark sense of humor. And I was I don't know if it's an undocumented person thing, but having I'm definitely a coping mechanism. We'll talk about it with my therapist later. But yeah, no, I think it was feeling, and not really even recognizing as such. It was just these overwhelm of emotions and not even being able to put a name to it. And I was oh wait, there's something's wrong, something's off, because this isn't normal. And I think until tried to seek out therapy or something to be able to kind of figure out what was going on. And I tried finding a therapist in the community or whatever. And the first person, well-intended, but didn't really understand, I don't think, the many things that impacted, I think, my mental health, my immigration status. And I felt low-key I was training her and explaining what DACA is and what it meant and all of its implications. And so I was but of course the people pleaser in me couldn't also let go and tell her hey, this isn't working out, breaking up with her. And so it was actually 2020, and so sessions ended anyway because global pandemic. And so I was I think it took a while, and then with everything happening in my family, in work, and whatever, in 2020, in the world, And I was like, okay, I need to try to find someone that works. And so looked at Latinx Therapy, the website, and try to find a therapist in the area, and was able to connect with someone. And she's wonderful. I love her, beautiful human being, and till this day has been my person for those things. So
that's great that you found someone. I know from my personal experience, it can be difficult, just to find someone who can understand or is knowledgeable about, what is going on with immigration and different like policies like DACA, and that's something that I struggled with, and it got to the point I was seeing a therapist, but again, I felt like I'm trying to like educate them, and at times when I would bring things up like relating to DACA or my immigration status, I don't know, I kind of felt like he didn't get it, and it kind of left me frustrated, and so I kind of just said, I think I need to part ways, and try and find somebody else. And I'm still kind of looking and trying to figure that out. So it can be hard.
So I told anyone, I was like, if you don't find your person, I was like, it's kind of like dating, and you have to find the right fit and the person that you vibe with, and but it can be frustrating, right? And so it's a journey in itself.
For sure. So if you're comfortable, saying like, in what ways has your status affected your mental health? I know, like, just to give you like an example, for me, I feel like growing up, I would always like pretend that the things that was being said in the media about immigrants wasn't affecting me. I'm like, that, like, I don't care what they're saying, like, I know that's not true and stuff. And then it wasn't until like I started doing the work on my own, like mental health and healing and stuff, that I realized, wait, this stuff kind of did get to me, subconsciously. And so, in what ways did, what specific ways did it affect you?
In every way, low-key, but like, no, as I was like reflecting, I was like thinking about how kind of what you said, right, is you hear all of this rhetoric, right, and the political landscape since I've been involved in that space, and I think it's also like, how teachers say, or like in education, I don't know if you've heard, where they say like, oh, if you call a child a bad kid, like they'll internalize that and they'll act accordingly, and they'll start to exhibit behaviors, right, that you're telling them that that's who they are. And I feel like low-key, like that's how I was, but trying to fight against it so much, and feeling like I needed to like be the perfect student, be the perfect blah blah blah, and so much so that like it kind of got to a point where like, since it wasn't enough and nothing was changing, I kind of internalized it and felt like I wasn't enough, and like didn't really realize that was happening, and how much all of that was affecting me, and like how I saw myself and how I navigated the world, and trying to like tread lightly and not make waves and but like, and realizing that shouldn't be, a way to live, or that you existing is enough to be respected as a human, and that I don't have to like be extraordinary to be worth, having stability in my life and normality, right? Like, and a lot of unlearning, a lot of digging, I think, and reflecting and all of that. But it is, and it has been, and it continues to be a journey.
Definitely. So it's 2024 and elections are right around the corner. So I kind of wanted to, talk to you to see how like you're doing with it, Actually, the DNC just happened right here in Chicago, and I don't know about you, but like I've been trying to follow like what's going on, and I was looking to see if they said anything about like immigration. It looks like not a lot is being said about immigration, and just kind of want to see how like you're feeling with these elections coming up.
Yeah, I think in similar to past elections, I sort of like start by like tuning it out, and like not really engaging right away. I think because it's just like you already like think like navigating your day-to-day stuff, and I think in my work, I think probably every election year I've been engaged in like social services in some way or something like that I feel like it'd be too real. And I think particular this year, with everything happening in the world, with their silencing or not even allowing, I think, folks to talk about Palestine or the genocide. It's I don't know. It's just like already losing faith in humanity, and I think it was just like I don't even want to like look. I like honestly just like tried to ignore it as much as I could, unless I like saw it on social media or people that were there. But it's incredibly disappointing and sad, like, to see that. And honestly, like, I haven't really, and maybe because I haven't been paying attention, but haven't really heard any specifics on policy on immigration or anything like that. And I think, like, even with Biden, I remember having the conversation with my parents, and they're like, oh, like, is he actually good? And I was like, listen, I was like, he's not going to do anything, like, extraordinary or anything. I was like, what maybe he'll do is keep the status quo. And I mean, he hasn't even, done that. But so I was, yeah. And I think similarly, that's the thing, right? Like, and I guess I acknowledge, right, that some people are, have ignited, some hope has been ignited on some people, but still, like, I don't know. I'm like, I don't know, pessimistic or whatever, but yeah,
Yeah, I feel you in that. I kind of try to not pay too much attention. I think it's unconsciously, though. Like, yeah. I'm just like, I don't want to know what's going on.
Yeah, but to a point, right? And and like, we don't have the privilege of being able to be like, it'll be what it'll be, because it's impacting our lives. So, yeah, it's tough. And I think, like, eventually, right, like, I'll start paying attention or whatever, but and realize how much it's impacted me later. So maybe in a couple of months I'll reflect and be like, dang.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Even though I feel like I don't want to pay attention, I do feel that responsibility of, like, I need to be up to date, And
yeah.
As much as, some of the things might not be what I want to hear, I still need to hear it.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, like, as we're talking about elections, the 2016 election, because that was when I think the curtain opened, I feel like, in terms of, like, not just immigration policy, but, like, all kinds of policy. And with the Trump administration, coming in, and just wanted to know, like, where were you in that time, and, what was going on with you, and how are you dealing with the stuff that was going on in the 2016 election?
So I was still in undergrad. So being in a liberal, I guess, school at the time in Galesburg, Illinois. If you're not familiar with Galesburg, it's southern Illinois, middle of nowhere. Very, like, blue collar, predominantly white, I think. And I think it was hard because at the time, right, like you said, right, like, feelings came out and people felt emboldened, and so it wasn't just like people that were like, oh, nobodies. It was people that we had met through and built relationships with throughout the years that we were in school and were living in Galesburg, bringing out their Trump flags or putting out their banners and businesses. And it was tough, I think, for students. And because you can't just say like, right, like they had built friendships and relationships with the community, and so it was like very confusing, I think, because a part of you is like disheartened that they're like, you know, advocating for this person who's threatening, right, like your safety and your livelihood, and it felt like very personal, and so it was a difficult thing, I think, to navigate. And I think like a lot of like the culture houses were like experience things where like like trucks would drive by and like say racial slurs. Like one of the fraternities like brought out their Confederate flag. Wow. And so like it was a wild time, but I think like at the same time we were trying to like prepare, and so like again, not even processing, I think, the wildness of the situation, and we're like, we need to talk to admin, we need to make sure that undocumented students are protected, and we need to make sure we get lawyers here, and da da da. So like this whole thing is happening, and we're like, we need to organize.
Spurred action.
Exactly. And so like again, didn't allow myself the time to process or anything until I think the election, and then they canceled classes. Like it was really like wow. somber, and like people were crying, people held like space outside, and like depending on how you wanted to like, you know, digest the news, and they had like a mic for folks who like shared like how they were feeling. They had like resources in our lounge to like be able to like again process however you wanted. And so it was really nice to have, I think, the community, I think, and so you weren't alone. But it was like, dang, like we're here, and I think people really fearing for their safety, and yeah, I think it's very real. And until after, I was like, oh yeah, this is impacting me in a huge way. And so I think and that has been, I think, every election. We're like on some sort of action, and we need to organize, and that it's not until after that I like reflect, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of huge. Yeah.
It's kind of like you switch into survival mode almost.
Yeah.
It's like I don't have time to sit here and think about how I feel. I need to do something.
Literally, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. For me, I was still in high school when it happened, and and the high school I went to was predominantly white and kind of a conservative town. And I just remember like waking up, because I went to sleep and I didn't see the results. I woke up and I saw the results, and I just bawled. I didn't even want to go to school that day, but I was like, okay, I gotta go. And yeah, it was not fun because there was people, you know, obviously expressing their support. And at the time, I hadn't found community yet, so it was very, like, I felt very alone. And I remember in class, I can't remember if it was before the election or after, but one of my peers was talking about immigrants and was saying how, like, oh, we need to, like, send them all back or whatever. And I was livid. I, like, turned around and I told him, I kind of told him that I was an immigrant. Like, so you're saying that people like me don't deserve to be here, you know? And he the look on his face was like, whoa. Like, I didn't know that you were. And it just kind of goes to show how there's, like, a lot of people who are in a similar situation as us, and they're not open about it, right? And so I think people don't think about the people around them. So that was a dark time for me, but thankfully when I got into college, I felt like I finally found community, and I think that is so important for us. And I think especially in this time with this election coming up, I think rallying and being in community is so important to help us process, you know, not just take action, but process how we're doing, how we're feeling, right?
No, that's so true.
So aside from, like, going to therapy, what other things have you done that have helped you to, like, cope with some of your mental health struggles?
So I think I've like tried to like do research and like find ways I think that to kind of build my tool belt of ways to be able to kind of go through that healing journey and really learn I think what I think is important too, because I'm like, when I like my body's going into a flight or fight response, and I'm like, look, you're not getting attacked by a bear. Like this email, like whatever happens, like it's okay. Like like you're fine. And yeah, I think mostly that is finding different resources and ways that that work for you, because not one thing is going to work every time, and so it's important to kind of build that those tools and resources to be able to come back with comes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who is studying to be a therapist and help support people's mental health, what tools have you found useful?
Yeah. I think in different times, different things have worked. I think I've tried to listen to my body more, and I think because depending on what it is, right? Like if it's like breathing exercises or finding things that are grounding, I think like some people really like fidget toys, and I find myself even doing like with a hair tie, and my therapist would be like pay attention to the texture and things like that. Da, da, da. So I think like figuring out what works for you. I've like tried to do yoga and incorporate like even just like going outside will make a difference, and looking at a tree, like things that I think that are just like very grounding have helped me personally. And then other things, right? If it's other things that are occupying your mind, figuring out how to put that, how to take it out, whether it's talking to a friend, talking to a family member, journaling, that's helped too a lot. Of don't do it as much as I think like I would want to incorporate it, but I think when I feel it kind of in my mind is like going, I'm like, oh, let me just write it, and I think it is really helpful to just get it out, whether it's ranting to my husband or writing it in a journal. It's helpful. Or I think again like if you can't like go outside, my therapist would be like, oh, look at like a nature video, and it does help. Or like listening to the sounds instead of like reggaeton. Like sometimes you want to listen to it. It's like, okay, maybe that's like overstimulating me a little bit. So again, listening to your body and what it needs. If you want to run, I think like that's all. I can't run right now. I do not have the stamina for that. But it's also it has helped me in the past. So yeah, I think different coloring, even like singing. I think like I had a lot of anxiety when I would drive, and so I told my therapist, I was like, I don't know what it is when I'm like singing really loud. It just like helps, and she's like, yeah, it's something like, I don't remember the technicality or the whatever, but it's like something that with your like vocal cords or whatever, and it helps you kind of like calm down and soothe yourself almost. I was like, didn't know that, but so sometimes even like your body knows, like, oh, singing really loud helps me calm down, like, or dancing, and things like that. So things that you're already doing and left to do, and just incorporating it, I think, when you're feeling like it's a little too much.
Yeah. And everyone's different. What might work for you might not work for another person.
Exactly.
And I think it's also just about trying, different things. Like, I know I've recommended some things to people, and they try, and they're like, nope, that's not for me, but at least I tried.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so recently we celebrated the 12th anniversary of DACA, and I know you're a DACA recipient, so I also kind of wanted to touch on that, and, how has DACA affected your life and your mental well-being as well?
Yeah. When it first passed, I think I was like angry and frustrated. Which is not common, I think, for like what I've heard from folks, because it was just like whispers, right? Something was going to be announced, something was going to happen, and I think in kind of like being somebody that is always like, I need to like give back for my parents' sacrifices, wanted, you know, my parents to be included in that, and they weren't. And it was just kind of like that, like dreamer narrative over and over again. And right, the dreamer narrative being that, you know, only like if you're a stellar person or like you have like perfect grades, you need to deserve it almost, right? And it was so frustrating, I think, and almost felt like a sort of guilt, I think, in taking it, because I was like, what makes me different, right? Like, why, like, if I was like, and all of these, like, you know, like deadlines or whatever and dates that you had to be, like, it's all very arbitrary. And like a lot of people didn't qualify, even like own advocates that helped the pass and make it happen, because it was a lot of advocates that did the work to get DACA being a thing. And I think that part of it was like, you know, like, and whatever, they're like, oh, we needed to negotiate, we needed to give, da-da-da. I was like, I don't want to hear it. But of course, right, the other side of it is I've definitely have benefited from it, right? Like, it allowed me to get a driver's license. It allowed me to get a social security number and work and be able to help my parents. But again, right, like why does it have to be like that? And I think, like, the fear continues, right? Because you every 2 years, and every time it goes into court, it's so, like, unstable and not a way to live. I think, like, every time that it comes up, it's, like, anxiety-inducing, because, like, oh, like, I have to, like, do this again. And, like, you have to do this at, like, 6 months because they're, like, taking really long. And it has happened, like, just this year that it didn't come in time. And so I was temporarily out of a job. And so, like, constantly having to deal with that is exhausting and, like, no way to live. And of course, like, what, 12 years, like, of doing that, because I've had it since it started when I was in high school, and it was like right before I went to college. So, like, I guess perfect timing, but, like, at the same time, like, how long, you know, like, we had our 10-year anniversary for it, like, you know, like, how long is too long, and what do we have to do? And just, like, constantly, like, having to deal with that is exhausting. And so recognizing, right, that it has provided me some sort of stability, but recognizing that it's also not enough.
Yeah, I definitely can understand how you feel. I feel, for me, I'm also a DACA recipient, and so I don't know what it is, but I kind of forget. I kind of forget that I do have DACA, and I feel like when I remember, oh, I have DACA, it kind of makes me, it kind of forces me to reflect and be grateful as well, because I have met, you know, other people who don't have DACA, but yet found a way to, you know, you can continue to go to school or start their own business, and I'm like, dang, I'm taking this for granted, you know. And so I think it's important to practice gratitude for it, but again, the uncertainty of it, and I think it's supposed to go to court soon again, sometime next year. And I feel like every time I see it, like in the news, like that it's going to court again, I'm like, okay, let's prepare, let's brace for the worst, you know, because you never know. And it is frustrating. I feel that I also felt a lot of anger. I think especially when I was a teenager, I felt a lot of anger. I mean, maybe it's just like the typical teenage angst, you know?
Yeah.
But I was angry at the world. Like, I was always mad. And my parents would be like, why do you look mad? You know, because I am mad. Yeah. And I think as I've grown, it's something that I had to learn to process and integrate and not hold on to. Right, because when you hold on to anger or any negative emotion, that causes a wealth of problems. And so learning to use my anger, right, but not like hold on to it so tightly. I think especially when it comes to immigration policy.
Yeah. Have you seen Elementals or like Inside Out?
Which one's that one?
Well, Elementals is the one where it's like Ember, so it's like, and she's supposed to be like a daughter of immigrants, or I think it's like kind of hinted at like that way, and then like what ends up being her partner is like water, and so
I did see it,
and so you know, relating to that a lot and feeling like I was like, why am I like crying at this theater about this cartoon movie about this fire and this like water bubble? But it's like very real, right? And I think similarly, Inside Out is like no emotion is like a bad emotion. Like we have our feelings for a reason, and they're trying to tell us something. And so I think also recognizing that and you know, realizing that feeling anger, feeling sadness is not a bad thing, and it's just like processing it and listening to it and not doing what I was doing and trying to like put it away and nope, can't deal with this now, and just loading, like it becoming too heavy, and that's when like I finally process it. And so trying not to do that and learn to like process it in real time, and figuring out the best way to navigate that. But
Speaking of movies, what are your thoughts on like how immigrants are portrayed in media? And I don't mean media like the news or anything, but like like movies and books and I don't know, podcasts too. Like you know, what have you seen? How do you feel about it?
I don't know if you know who Jose Antonio Vargas is. I don't know if before he didn't recognize himself as you know, an organizer advocate, but he he first had a documentary called Documented, and so he tells his story, but he's very much a writer, and in having immigrants and documented people not be like a stereotype, right, in media. And I think up until that point, I hadn't really seen that. I think it was always like, and even outside of like immigration, I think just like brown people, black and brown people, you know, being perceived as criminals, or being perceived as like the only roles you would get was with an accent if you were brown, right? Like as a cleaning lady or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that, right? Like, but you know, being perceived in all aspects, and not just being like, I think like my husband, he's also like in media, and says like, it's just being that like, oh, you happen to be also Latino, like you're a superhero and you're also Latino and have all of these like identities as part of your culture, but not that it's like super focused on like, you know, like you having like the stereotypical accent or the stereotypical whatever it is. And I think more and more thankfully have seen a little bit, I think more representation. What is it, One Day at a Time? I think in some shows, I think like in Grey's Anatomy, there was like a character who I think was DACA. I think it was dramatized a little bit, but you know, I guess the intention was there. And so I forget what his company is called, the individual, Jose Vargas, and he serves as a consultant when they're having these characters be part of these shows or movies, and is able to kind of bring in the right people that have lived through these experiences that they're trying to present in media, and it be accurate. And so I think also in Superstore with America Ferrera, they had one of the employees who was undocumented, and like throughout the show, that wasn't a conversation. It wasn't until they were like, oh, like where's your like social security card, and he was like, I don't have that. And he calls his mom, and he's like, hey, where's my like social security? I think it was social security card. Point is, some sort of document, and they're like, you don't have it, like what? And so like having to navigate, but it's like a comedy, so like even being able to like realize that we can be like happy go people, like it's not like we're not just like our immigration status too, right? Like you said, we sometimes forget if it's not like our status throwing our life out of whack. Like sometimes we're just people, like, you know, and have like varying experiences, varying personalities, occupations, interests, passions, and
I recently was doing research on this for the Center for Immigrant Progress.
Yeah.
Looking at, what kind of media is out there in regards to immigrants, or not even just immigrants, but like mixed status families. And it's so limited, right? There's not a whole lot out there, and it kind of makes me sad. I feel like we need more representation, and I think the first time I ever saw anything like related to that was the movie Bajo la Misma Luna with Kate del Castillo. And it kind of, it depicted this mom who, is trying to have a better life for her kid, and she comes to the United States, and then her child comes over, and the challenges he faced. And I think that was the first time that I felt really connected to a movie. And I feel like I haven't really felt that way since. Yeah. I mean, I recently did watch another movie. It's called Minari. It's on Max. It's about a Korean American immigrant family, and it's a really great movie. Highly recommend.
Okay.
Yeah, but it talks about this family's story and the reason why they came here.
Yeah.
And all the challenges, the ups and the downs that come with pursuing the American dream, right? Yeah, so hopefully, we can start to see a little bit more positive representation.
Yeah. Most recently, I don't know if you saw Blue Beetle.
I haven't seen it yet.
So, yeah, with like George Lopez and the DC movie. So I'm not even like very big, but when I was excited to see like a Latino superhero, and so I went to see it. And now I don't want to do spoilers, but there's a scene where they have something, and so like I don't know if it's like FBI or whatever raids their home, and like bad things happen, right? And so the whole family's like freaking out, and like it's just like a very like traumatizing event. And I didn't even realize that like as I saw it like resembled like an ICE raid. And so I was in the theater, and I was like bawling, like wheezing, like I was like, and my husband's just like, are you okay? And like, right, like I'm having this reaction, and so I'm like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize. And so it's like things like that, but it was like so powerful. And a lot of people, like, it's interesting, perceived it differently, because they're like, why did they add that scene? Like, that doesn't happen. And I was like, not me, like, having this episode in the middle of the theater, and people are like, oh, yeah, that doesn't happen. That's so unrealistic. And I was like, that's so wild how, like, it's also interpreted very different, depending on lived experiences or how, that resembled so closely to that when I saw that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, I need to go see it now.
Yeah. Fair warning. Yeah.
Wow. But yeah, I think there's something very powerful about not just like sharing our stories, but seeing our stories like on the big screen, right? In movies, in books. I think there's definitely more out there in like books, for sure. I started reading. What's the book called? I think it's called I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter.
I've actually met her. I interviewed her. She's really cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started reading that book. I need to get back to reading it.
Yeah.
But it's like, similarly telling this story about an immigrant family, right? And there's just something so powerful about it. And hopefully we see a lot more of it. Yeah.
I think it's not her, it was something else. Just kidding. But I also read that book, really good book.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely more books. Most recently too. Americanized is also a really good one. Again, kind of like a little humorous, but also in how she navigates the world being undocumented. So yeah, there's definitely more written. But yeah, I think they're always kind of like side characters. Like it's like a one-off, and the ways that I've seen it, it's never like the whole the main character or things like that. So yeah, it's a good point.
But our stories deserve to be shared and
absolutely
seen.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Well, before we, close out, is there anything else that you wanted to share relating to, mental health and status?
Yeah. You're not alone. I think it often can feel very alienating and overwhelming, and don't feel like you're alone in that, because I know the more that I've sought community and talked to folks, even kind of not like an established group, right, and finding in times of crises like that support and community, and finding what works for you, and recognizing that it doesn't make you weak. It's not a sign of weakness if you want to seek help. I think quite the opposite. And you are, not to be cheesy, you are loved and worthy of finding your journey to healing, and lots of love.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation. So thank you, and we will be having another episode continuing our conversation about mental health.